What if the most controversial moment of the year wasn't a speech, but a pause? Not a shouted accusation, not a viral meltdown, not even a name spoken out loud. Just a few seconds on a brightly lit stage, at one of the most symbolically charged events in America, where millions of viewers later swore they heard something they were never supposed to hear. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And once they heard it, they couldn't unhear it. Because this wasn't supposed to happen here. Not at the MLK Jr. Beloved Community Awards. Not on a night built around moral authority, unity, and reverence. Not with hosts known for discipline, intelligence, and restraint. And not with a name that already carries more cultural baggage than almost any other. Yet here we are. In the days following the 2026 ceremony, a question began circulating quietly at first, then insistently, then explosively. Did Anika Noni Rose and Aldis Hodge just take a shot at Meghan Markle on stage? And if they did, or if people believe they did, why did no one correct the record? That question is where this story begins. Not with certainty, not with outrage, but with something far more destabilizing, ambiguity. Because ambiguity is dangerous. It invites interpretation. It rewards projection. And in a moment like this, it can fracture an audience faster than any direct accusation ever could. Let's slow this down. The MLK Jr. Beloved Community Awards are not a casual award show. They are not built for jokes that land sideways or commentary that requires decoding. This is a space that trades in symbolism. Every word is weighed. Every pause is deliberate. Every host is chosen not just for fame, but for credibility. Which is exactly why the reaction to this moment hit so hard. If this had happened at a late-night show, it would have burned for a news cycle and died by morning. If it had happened at a comedy roast, it would have been expected. If it had happened online, it would have dissolved into noise. But it didn't happen in any of those places. It happened here. And that matters. Because when people believe they've witnessed something transgressive in a space that prides itself on moral clarity, they don't just ask what was said. They ask why it was allowed. They ask who knew. They ask who benefited. And eventually, they ask who stayed silent. That silence is the thread we're going to follow. Now, before we go any further, something needs to be said clearly and carefully. There is no official transcript that includes a direct insult. There is no verified clip where a host explicitly names Meghan Markle in a derogatory way. There is no formal statement from the organizers confirming that any such reference was intended. And yet, tens of thousands of viewers insist they heard a pointed reference. Commentators replayed the moment frame by frame. Social feeds filled with interpretations, not quotes. Reaction videos outpaced raw footage. And a specific phrase began to circulate, one that was never formally uttered, but somehow became the shorthand for the entire controversy. Yacht Princess. Where did that come from? Why did it stick? And why did it attach itself so quickly, so aggressively, to this particular moment? Those questions are not about gossip. They're about cultural memory. About how certain narratives are already preloaded, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite them. And this wasn't a spark. It was a smolder. What makes this especially complicated is who was on that stage. Anika Noni Rose is not known for carelessness. Aldis Hodge is not known for impulsive commentary. These are not figures who stumble into controversy accidentally. Their careers are built on intentionality, on knowing when to speak and when not to. Which is why their presence alone raised the stakes. Viewers weren't asking, did a celebrity say something messy? They were asking, did two respected figures choose their words knowing exactly how they would land? That's a very different question. And then there's the third presence. The one who wasn't on stage. The one who didn't attend. The one whose name didn't need to be spoken for the room to react the way it did. Meghan Markle. By 2026, Meghan Markle occupies a strange and volatile place in public consciousness. She is no longer simply a former royal, nor just a media entrepreneur, nor merely a cultural lightning rod. She is something more abstract now, a symbol to supporters, a provocation to critics, and, increasingly, a figure people project meaning onto whether she's involved or not. Which means that when people think they hear a reference to her, especially in a space like this, they don't wait for confirmation. They respond emotionally first, analytically later, if at all. And that's exactly what happened. Within hours of the ceremony, clips began circulating. Not full speeches. Not wide shots. Short segments. Reaction shots. Edits. Commentary layered over commentary. People slowed down audio. Others claimed the phrase wasn't said, but clearly implied. Some argued it was a coincidence. Others said coincidence was impossible. What's striking is how quickly certainty formed on both sides. One camp declared it a deliberate public rebuke, a quiet but devastating one. Proof, they said, that sentiment had shifted even within elite cultural spaces. The other camp dismissed the entire thing as projection. Internet hysteria. Another example of people hearing what they wanted to hear. And then there was a third group. Smaller, quieter, more unsettled. They weren't asking whether it was true or false. They were asking why no one was clarifying it. Because clarification would have been easy. A single sentence from the hosts. A brief note from the organizers. A neutral statement explaining context. Any of it would have collapsed the speculation. None of it came. And in modern media ecosystems, silence is never neutral. Silence creates room. Silence invites narrative. Silence allows the loudest interpretation to harden into memory. So when days passed without comment, the story didn't cool down. It deepened. People began asking new questions. Not about the phrase itself, but about the reaction in the room. The audience response. The camera cuts. The timing. The expressions. The things that don't show up in transcripts, but shape perception all the same. And slowly, something else happened. The story stopped being about what was said. It became about what the moment represented. For critics of Meghan Markle, it felt like validation. A sign that skepticism had reached spaces once assumed to be sympathetic. For supporters, it felt like another example of coded hostility, of narratives being smuggled through implication rather than accountability. Both sides felt confirmed. Which should tell you something. When everyone feels proven right, the truth is usually more complicated than anyone wants it to be. And that's where this investigation lives. Not in declaring winners or losers. Not in repeating viral claims. But in unpacking how a moment like this forms, spreads, and embeds itself into public memory, especially when the people who could shut it down choose not to. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to reconstruct the night, slowly. Not just the words, but the context that made those words combustible. We're going to look at the hosts, not as caricatures, but as professionals operating within constraints. We're going to examine Meghan Markle's position at this exact moment in time, and why even her absence shaped the reaction. And we're going to interrogate the silence. Because silence is not empty. It's full of calculation, caution, and sometimes fear. Along the way, we'll ask uncomfortable questions. About coded language. About audience bias. About why certain phrases attach themselves to certain women. And about how easily interpretation can become indictment. But we're not going to rush. This is a slow burn, because the truth here isn't explosive. It's corrosive. It eats away at clarity. It blurs lines. It forces you to sit with uncertainty longer than you'd like. And if you're already sure you know what happened, if you're confident this was either a calculated takedown or a baseless rumor, I'd ask you to hold that certainty loosely. Because the closer you look, the less simple it becomes. The real story isn't whether someone said something offensive on stage. The real story is how an entire audience came to believe something had happened, and why that belief was allowed to stand. And to understand that, we have to go back to the stage itself, to the space, to the expectations, to the kind of event where even a whisper can feel like a verdict. Because once you understand the room, you begin to understand why this moment didn't just pass. It lingered. The stage itself deserves attention, because context is everything. Imagine walking into a hall where the walls hum with history, where portraits of leaders, activists, and heroes of the civil rights movement line the corridors, where the air carries the weight of expectation, of symbolism, of moral gravity. That's the MLK Jr. Beloved Community Awards. Not a mere ceremony, not a celebrity gala, but a space designed to project values as much as celebrate them. Every gesture matters. Every pause matters. Every word can ripple outward far beyond the room. Anika Noni Rose and Aldis Hodge were chosen to host this particular year because of that weight. Both are respected not just for talent, but for discretion, for thoughtful engagement with culture, for the ability to carry an audience along without ever needing to resort to cheap spectacle. They are the kind of hosts who understand that the camera is always on, that a phrase misinterpreted can ignite months of debate, and that the room itself is a participant, not just a backdrop. And yet, even in spaces built for caution, interpretation can run ahead of intention. That's exactly what happened here. During their hosting duties, something subtle occurred, something that, to millions of viewers later, felt unmistakably pointed. But the challenge of reconstructing it is this: the moment is ephemeral. It's not on a transcript. It isn't captured in a full-length video that provides irrefutable clarity. What exists are clips, reaction shots, and interpretations, each layered with human bias, emotional expectation, and cultural framing. Consider this. When the phrase, "yacht princess," began circulating online, no one had proof that it had been said verbatim. No one had an official statement from the hosts. No one confirmed intent. Yet within hours, it became the shorthand for the entire event. Why? Because certain words, especially when tied to loaded figures like Meghan Markle, don't need to be spoken clearly to be understood. The human brain fills gaps. The cultural imagination does the rest. This is where audience psychology meets media dynamics. People want narrative closure, even in moments of ambiguity. They want to know, was this a dig? Was it accidental? Was it intentional? And in the absence of clear information, the strongest interpretations prevail. They dominate social feeds. They shape discussion. They harden into memory. In this case, the supposed onstage reference, coupled with Meghan Markle's public positioning, created a feedback loop. Interpretation feeds belief, belief fuels dissemination, and dissemination hardens perception. Meghan Markle's absence that night adds another layer. She didn't attend the awards, yet her presence, or, more precisely, her symbolic absence, dominated the room. People project meaning onto absences, sometimes more powerfully than onto actions. Her cultural footprint in 2026 was expansive and fraught. She had supporters who saw her as a figure of resilience and critics who framed her as a provocateur. Both groups read into every context, every pause, every look. In a sense, the audience constructed a narrative that may have never been explicitly delivered. And then there's the question of timing. The ceremony itself was meticulously structured: speeches, awards, performances, moments of reflection. Yet a single interjection, delivered in a few seconds of live exchange, can shift perception entirely. The timing made it memorable. The setting made it interpretive. The participants made it credible. Add social media amplification, and suddenly what might have been a minor inflection becomes a defining cultural moment. The online reaction is also worth dissecting. In the first few hours after the clips circulated, commentary varied wildly. Some viewers were certain of the host's intent. Others doubted it entirely. But the louder voices dominated the conversation. These aren't the voices of casual observers. They are commentators, influencers, and early adopters of viral interpretation. They curate the narrative before it's even fully formed. They amplify ambiguity into perceived fact. Then there's the silence. Organizers released no clarification. Hosts said nothing publicly. Meghan Markle's team offered no commentary. In normal circumstances, a brief statement could have sufficed. But silence is never neutral, especially in 2026. It functions as absence, as space for projection, as tacit endorsement, or as cautious protection. Whatever the reason, that silence allowed the yacht princess narrative to solidify. And once it solidified, it took on a life of its own. To fully understand the power of that moment, we have to look at the mechanics of perception. Humans are wired to detect patterns, even in noise. When you add historical narratives, criticism of public figures, gendered expectations, class markers, the mind constructs meaning faster than reality can intervene. The audience believed something had happened because the story made sense within their existing frameworks. The more it made sense emotionally, the less people questioned it factually. And yet, paradoxically, the moment is also about restraint. The hosts, trained and careful, were not performing recklessness. They were navigating a live audience, camera angles, and the symbolic weight of the night. If a deliberate reference existed, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. The ambiguity was part of its power. And the more subtle, the more people felt the need to interpret it. Because ambiguity invites interpretation, and interpretation demands attention. So, we have multiple layers. A historically resonant event, hosts with credibility and intentionality, a widely discussed figure absent from the stage, a fleeting but memorable on-stage moment, and the amplification engines of social media and cultural imagination. All of these converge to create what is now a contested moment in cultural memory. At this point, we're not talking about whether someone was attacked or insulted. We're talking about perception, projection, and narrative construction. We're talking about how a society interprets action, absence, and silence. Because in modern media, that's as consequential as any explicit statement. And that's why this story matters. Not because a phrase may or may not have been uttered, not because someone was offended, but because it illustrates how meaning is manufactured, transmitted, and remembered in the 21st century. Because it exposes the fragility of reputation and the volatility of interpretation. Because it forces us to ask, who controls the story when ambiguity reigns? And who is left to navigate the aftermath?